Everyone has an opinion about why the 2024 US presidential election played out the way that it did. Some people are saying that Kamala Harris was too liberal, others are saying that she wasn't liberal enough, and some even claim that she blew it by not going on the Joe Rogan podcast. What if I told you that none of those things really mattered? Let me explain. I'm sure by now a lot of you have seen charts like these which show a sharp rightward political shift across the country in almost every demographic and every state. Even at liberal bastions like New York City swing hard to the right, like this chart from Nate Silver shows. So if you look at these charts, you might think the country just didn't like the liberal policies that Harris represented and they vigorously rejected them at the polls. But is that really the case? Exit poll after exit poll showed that the economy was the top issue for voters. They also showed that President Biden's approval rating was really low. That makes you think that maybe this had nothing to do with Harris at all. Voters didn't like the state of the economy and they blamed Biden for that. John Sides created this chart which plots the president's approval rating in June versus the incumbent party's share of the popular vote. Based on Biden's low approval rating of less than 40%, he or any Democrat in the November election was projected to get 48% of the vote. As I'm recording this, the votes are still being counted, but it's looking like that's exactly where Harris is going to end up, with around 48% of the popular vote. Okay, so some of you might look at that and think, sure, people don't like the economy, but that's a reflection of the bad economic policies of the Biden administration, and Harris was a part of that administration. That's why she lost. But that might not be the real explanation. Here's a piece of evidence that suggests that larger forces were at play in the 2024 election. It's the fact that incumbent parties across the world have been losing elections this year. John Byrne Murdoch of the Financial Times points out that incumbent parties in the US, in the UK, France, Japan, and even India have lost votes in this year's elections. In fact, he says that every incumbent party in developed countries have lost votes this year, the first time that's ever happened in the 120 years that this data has been tracked. That's a pretty crazy statistic, and it seems to indicate that a bigger force was responsible for the US election results. So what could that force be? Well, it's probably inflation. We all know it, the price of everything from groceries to automobiles to houses went up dramatically between 2021 and 2023, and people were and still are really upset about it. The cost of living was the primary reason that the UK's Conservative Party lost power after 14 years in 2024, and is partly the reason that Japan's Liberal Democratic Party lost its parliamentary majority for the first time in 15 years. Inflation was, of course, a global phenomenon caused by pandemic-related supply chain issues, not the result of actions taken by any particular government. But people want someone to blame, hence the backlash against incumbent parties all around the world. Here's some more evidence that inflation might have been a big factor in this year's election results. Back in 2020, voters who made less than $100,000 backed Biden over Trump, while those who made more than $100,000 favored Trump over Biden. This time around, it was reversed, with Harris getting more votes from those who made over $100,000 than Trump did, while doing worse than him when it comes to voters making less than $100,000. People with lower incomes tend to feel the effects of inflation more than those with higher incomes, so this might be a reason for the switch here, and the reason why voters overall rejected Harris. This also ties into another theory I've been hearing about, which is the idea that the president's incumbency advantage is gone. It used to be the case that if you were a president running for re-election, you had a leg up because you could dominate the news coverage, you could use your presidential powers to implement popular policies, and you could campaign more effectively than your opponent could. Before Trump's first term, there were 3 straight presidents who won re-election over a 24-year period: Clinton, Bush, and Obama. And going back further before Trump, in the 11 presidential elections with incumbent candidates running, 8 were won by the incumbent. That's the incumbency advantage. But something might be changing. We saw Trump lose his first re-election bid, and now Biden's vice president, Harris, lost against Trump. As this tweet from Joey Politano points out, social media, quote, makes it easier than ever for voters to concentrate disaffection on whoever's in power. In other words, rather than there being an incumbency advantage advantage, there might actually be an incumbency disadvantage now. And if that's the case, then we might see more elections like the one we just had, where the incumbent party loses. Now, I'm not saying that's definitely going to be the case or anything. It's just a theory based on a small sample size. But it's something to think about. Anyway, I know some of you are going to agree with what I've said and others are going to disagree with it. Everyone is going to have their own favorite theory for why Trump beat Harris. Personally, I like this theory about how there's a bigger force in play because I think it matches up with what we've seen historically. We all know in the US that one party doesn't stay in power forever. We have a constant swing back and forth from Democrats to Republicans. That's an inevitability. And even though that's the case, every time it happens, there's a lot of chest thumping and gloating from the winning side and a lot of finger pointing and soul searching on the other side. I mean, it might not be satisfying to hear, but sometimes the results have nothing to do with the candidates. But who knows? Maybe there are factors bigger than inflation and anti-incumbency sentiment that played a role in the election outcome this year. Maybe Trump's messaging around issues like immigration and crime really resonated with voters. Or maybe if Biden stepped aside sooner and allowed an open nomination process, the outcome might have been different. I don't know. There are a million different things that happened and that could have happened. I just think that people really hated the high inflation of 2021 through 2023, and they really wanted to blame someone for it. They finally got their chance in this election. Anyway, what do you think? What is the real reason Trump won the election? Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video.